Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Mania, and I am a fiction co-chair with the Brooklyn Book Festival. And I'm so happy to welcome you to the 2025 Brooklyn Book Festival's virtual festival day for a conversation with Melissa Febos and Catherine Lacey. Before we begin, some housekeeping. I want to let you know that books by authors in this program can be purchased through the link in the chat. And some other housekeeping, we're just going to embrace the fact that I'm sweating like profusely and I will be dabbing myself throughout this conversation. So please still love me, you guys.
I can't see
Okay.
it at all. You're not even
No.
listening.
Okay. Okay, glad to hear. I also like overdid it with the foundation. I'm like, I look a little
No.
pallid, more than usual.
You look beautiful and very matte.
Oh my God, thank
Yeah.
you, you guys, two professional goddesses. I'm so happy to talk to you guys. Listen, we're here to talk about these books. This is a panel called Naked on the Page for those of you who are just joining in during the live program. So what I'm going to do is I want to read a passage from each book, if that's okay. And I'm doing this a little unorthodox because what when I was reading these, I just like kept underlining to the point where I just stopped underlining. So I'm gonna do something that I've never done, and I'm just gonna flip to a random page, and I'm just gonna read. We'll see. We'll see what we land on. Okay, Melissa, I'm gonna start with you
I
with
love it.
the dry season.
I love
Okay,
where this is going.
this is like a. I feel like I'm doing a card trick. Hold on. Okay, let's see where we end up. Okay, page. Oh, nope. This really is, and by like I flip to a page, I mean like I'm just gonna like keep flipping until something like catches my eye 30 minutes later. Um, hmm. The book from the book festival is gonna be like, oh no. And by like I'm doing this like randomly, I mean like I found a passage earlier that I really want to read. Okay. Okay, let's just go here. She spent the first year of her recovery totally free of dating, sex, flirting, and masturbation. This sounded extreme to me, although I remembered how in the early days of getting clean from heroin, total abstinence from all mind altering chemical substances also seemed extreme. Sex and love lie in the less binary realm of addictions, along with food, work, and codependency, whose objects cannot or should not be removed wholesale from one's life. Abstinence from these addictions is something that must be negotiated. After the speaker finished, she called on the other attendees to share, and I gathered from their contributions that every sex and love addict their own determined their own definition of abstinence based on their own particular set of troubling behaviors, though many chose, like her, to relinquish masturbation. Okay, that's one passage. And I'm going to do the same, albeit I'm going to keep this one shorter. Okay, this is way quicker. So this is from the Möbius book by Catherine Lacey. Still waiting at the airline counter, it occurred to me that I ought to have a more bati tattooed somewhere conspicuous on my body, so I'm forced to remember it, to account for it, to love what I do not naturally love, to go willingly and joyfully into whatever unmovable things occur. Death, betrayals, homes burned down, canceled flights, books that refuse to be written, late trains, crashed cars, illnesses, and dead ends of every sort. A woman nearby, burdened with luggage and children, could not believe the news that their flight had been canceled. She did not love it. I could not blame her. I turned my focus back to my agent, whose eyes had taken on a glassy, cartoonish worry. Let's go a little bit more. Naturally, one should be skeptical of what a professional mystic tells you about your fate or the innate predicament of your life, given the role manipulation can play in jobs that truck in the immaterial religion, psychology, academia. I had not paid the witch nor the druid for services of divination. Each of them offered their confidence in my future for free. Yet, believing in one's innate luck felt distinctly American in the very worst way. Both mic drop moments, even though, it was a little clunky at first. So, my friends, I want to start us off with something to get the conversation going. And now this panel is, of course, called Naked on the Page. And you both have been naked on the page for quite some time now. And I want to ask you, how has your nudity evolved on the page this time around?
Every time you say naked on the page, I think of that horrible show, Naked and Afraid, which I guess is how it starts. First, you're naked and afraid, and then you're naked on the page after you're done.
That's that's the binary.
I
Who
mean,
wants to kick us off?
I feel like this, I don't feel like I've actually been like naked on the page in the past. I mean, like this is my first time writing nonfiction in a book form like this. And like, I think I must have messaged you at some point or somehow about like, how do you do this? Like, I mean, I understand there is something about writing fiction that, you know, involves some element of vulnerability and you have to be present and abstractly naked, but it's totally different. And for me, very difficult. And I was sort of shocked by how difficult it was to put out a book that was nonfiction. And there's a different kind of vulnerability. There's a different kind of like space that opens up between you and readers. And so for me, I feel like I'm a total novice. And like Melissa, this is like not your first naked rodeo. And I'm so glad that we're actually getting to like to do this event together because I've wanted to talk to you about so many of these things, but I'm not in Iowa. So
Yeah. 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 No, I have been sending you so much love from Iowa the whole time because I know exactly how it feels. And it is like, being naked on the page is at once like a very predictable experience and it's also a really acute experience. Every
right.
time. This is like my fifth nonfiction book that uses personal narrative and basically sort of lays out a lot of stuff that I had trouble saying aloud, even to my therapist at the time it was happening. And I would actually say that this book is in some ways like, I guess in some ways it's more and less naked than other things because it's the first time I've written about a subject that wasn't, and I hate to invoke this and all its connotations, but the experiences that I write about in this book you'd be hard pressed to classify them as traumatic. They're just sort of embarrassing
Mhm.
and personal. Just the kind of things you don't talk about with strangers because it's your private business. And uh and so it was actually like this was kind of a gentler experience for me in some ways and because I wasn't like dredging the lake of my past, I was able to bring parts of my personality that haven't there hasn't always been room for in my previous books. Like in this book, I was able to like make fun of myself and have a sense of humor
Mhm.
in a way that was so much more fun than having to be serious all the time by
Mhm.
virtue of the content of the book. But it still feels like, yeah, like you're, sending your little naked baby out into the world. Like, do you like her? Except the baby is you, and like
Right.
your
Oh,
worst
it's
moments on
unbearable.
earth, you're like, huh? Do you guys like her? Is she cute?
Well, that's like a whole, I mean, that's a kind of nudity, right? Like you're showing a side of yourself, this humorous side, this side that's willing to make, poke fun at yourself a little bit. I think being naked on the page is not just about, uh, unearthing things that are maybe difficult to talk about, but you've metabolized and you put them on the page. You've orchestrated this experience for the reader, but it's still very vulnerable. But I think when I say like something like nudity on the page, it's like I feel very naked right now writing fiction. Like I feel because I'm a nonfiction writer. So to
I'm
write my
also
first,
writing fiction.
is this about the chronic pain? Oh wait, this is a recorded thing. Never mind. I forgot that we're doing like an actual
Separate,
event.
separate novel. Two novels.
Okay, amazing. But I'm gonna get the vaudeville hook any second now from the Brooklyn Book Festival. They're like, we're not gonna ask you to moderate ever again. But I think I think when you're approaching something new, like, and for you, Catherine, like something that's memoir, even though like there is a novella in this as well. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this book, it is a novella as in addition to a memoir, and you read it one way and then you flip it over and it's printed the other way. So one's a novella, one's the memoir. Catherine, what was that? What did blurring the lines between memoir and fiction, how did playing with that form help you explore what you were exploring in this book and exploring in terms of your personal truth?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote like this being the kind of first nonfiction book I wrote, it was really circumstantial. It was really like and you will know why. If you read the nonfiction, you'll be like, oh, I see why Catherine wasn't really able to like function normally for a period of time. And like, I was just writing to kind of just keep, because I am always writing. I keep a notebook. And like the less I have to do, the more the notebook gets filled up. And for a while, I really had very little to do except just like try and live. And so I was writing this nonfiction stuff for a while, not really sure where it was going. But then once it was like getting towards a book territory, I guess I thought I was like, maybe it's a memoir. Like maybe it's just, maybe I just have to accept that. But like, I don't know if I want to publish it. I was kind of in the weird stage with it. And then I was like, no, it's like, it's going to be a book, but I need to do something else to it. And I put it away for like about a year. And then I don't know. I feel like at this point, I black out and I'm not really sure what the process was in between being like, I know I have a memoir and now like somehow I'm going to complete it by writing a chunk of fiction. I think for me, there's just like any genre, you get better or you learn better sort of how you're going to, live in
Sure.
that genre like over time. And so it makes sense to me that Melissa feels like, like fifth nonfiction book, you start to get like, it doesn't maybe feel like it is just as vulnerable as any of the other ones, but maybe it doesn't feel so like you have your sea legs a little bit more. And I think like I very much have
Mm.
my sea legs with writing fiction. I feel like I do. And I don't know. I think there were just some things, there were like aspects of the memoir side that I really couldn't write about directly. And I wanted those to still be in there. There were like aspects of, I don't know, having the ability to actually make fun of yourself within nonfiction, I think is really hard. And like I tried to get that in on the nonfiction side as much as I could, but I really did feel like I needed to have some sort of extra space of like, I need to be able to poke holes in my own recollection of things and also like take myself less seriously on the memoir side because it's like, if you go through like a really, traumatic loss of someone in your life or a breakup or you lose religion or you're, in some kind of mental health crisis, let's say, it feels like the biggest thing in the world to you and it's your world. But then you get even a month away from it and you're like, it's not actually that big of a deal, And so like but it doesn't mean that's not true. Like when you're in it, it is that big, right? And so like
Sure.
I at first I think I really wanted to write. I wanted the book to have the reflection of like the insanity that anyone can go through when they go through, a big traumatic loss in their life. But I don't know, I was trying to kind of walk a line of like sort of a story told from the heat of the moment of the story and also one where like I could kind of shoot arrows at myself from afar. Um,
Mm.
and for some reason I don't really remember what the real thought process was. I feel like I've told a variety of stories and I've been like, I actually don't think any of them are true. I actually have no idea. So,
Can I ask you a question, Catherine, about it? Because
sure.
I pulled a quote from the memoir half of the book and I used it in a talk that I gave this summer called Research as Divination,
Ooh,
which was basically a whole talk about how the quote in the book is, I'm paraphrasing, where the narrator says that she's tired of getting punked by fiction, where
yeah.
she thinks she's writing one thing and then the work reveals her true intentions and it's like, haha, you're actually processing this totally other, like much more uncomfortable thing. Which so perfectly described my experience of
I
writing.
wrote to you about it and you were like, it happens with nonfiction also.
Yeah,
And I was like, oh no, like, no.
memoir every single time. And yeah, and I just wondered like how that felt when you were writing, if you thought you were running away from that. And it makes sense that you would think that because you're like, no, this is what happened. Like, what happened from the beginning, and that's, where you're going. But always there's like a scary little surprise that arrives at a certain point that's like, oh no, here's the thing that you didn't know you were writing about.
Yeah. I don't think I'm actually far enough away from this book to know maybe what the like the ununderstood theme of the book was, but I mean, I assume that it's in there. I just I don't feel like and also like my experience with that, like with that experience of you, especially with fiction, because I feel like the fiction is like you're pulling your subconscious is much more
Yeah.
active, and there's like especially when you hit on that scene that it's just like it's coming out of your body like immediately, fully formed, and it's good, and you're like, wow, why was that easy? And usually those parts that are really easy are like
Hmm.
related to some kind of subconscious knowledge that you don't even really know
Mm.
yet. And so and so to greater or lesser degrees, I've had this experience of after I put a novel out, there's like something in it that is like upsettingly true that I wouldn't have been able to write about it if I had been totally conscious, I think. But I say that, and sometimes it's been a really big thing, and at other times it's been smaller, right? And so maybe I'm hoping maybe this one's not gonna in a few years I'll be like, oh no, hopefully it'll just be like a small thing, like a little kind of quiet revelation. But I mean, do you feel, Melissa, like because when I asked you about this, uh, like I mean, actually, now that I've like I was listening to an interview with you, or maybe it was in the book itself, I can't remember about no, it was in the book itself. It was in the dry season where you're writing about abandon me and how you thought you knew like what you were writing about, and it was only years later that you feel like you see that book as a as like a portrait of you within this relationship that it was unbearable, and yet you were in it and choosing it and everything. I mean, I feel I was like, yeah, I know that feeling. But are you far enough away from the dry season to have found like a kernel of I didn't know that was in there?
Yeah, I think it happened to me actually while I was writing it. And maybe this is different because when I was writing Abandon Me, I was writing it, and maybe this is similar to what you were describing about the memoir half of the Möbius book, where like I was writing for my life, like I was
Yeah.
writing to survive that like I was writing from inside the experience and then from right on the other side of it. And so
Mm.
I like couldn't see anything, and I was just like grasping for like the lowest level of clarity about what the fuck had happened in my life. And
Yeah.
my season I wrote from like 8 or 9 years after the experience. And I don't think I've ever waited that long, aside from like
Mm.
childhood elements that I've written about in books. But and so it's like I had already solidified a narrative of what that year had meant to me. And I was like, it completely changed my conception of love, my like ideal for intimacy with other people, and like the story of myself in my romantic relationships. What wasn't a part of the story was basically a spiritual awakening, like
Hmm.
Mm.
like this kind of God experience that I had during that year that it just didn't get folded into the story that I was telling myself about it
Hard
because
to write about.
I know. A friend of mine
Like
at
the
a reading
hardest thing.
was like, how come you promoted this book as a book about not having sex when really it's a book about like God? And I was like, I don't know. Where do you think that book would get shelved in the store? Like, I don't think you would have found it. But also, I didn't know that that's what the book was about until I was like, got to a certain point where I was like, oh, this isn't even about intimacy or sex or anything. This is like about the spirit. And that
Hmm.
even though it had affected the whole rest of my life since then, it didn't like click into place until I was writing it, which is an experience I've had lots of times.
Have you guys ever like when you're writing, and I think there's process and there's processing. Like a lot of us write to process things, and there's that whole discourse about writing being therapy and therapy's therapy and all that, sure. But what for you have you noticed, especially this time around? How do you determine that threshold where you go from I'm writing something that is just for me to shaping it something for readers? And have you ever sort of published something that maybe you were like, oh, maybe I should have kept that to myself? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I don't really know where the line comes because I do think it like the more you just kind of, I mean, it's sort of like a compulsion at this point of just like processing things in language sort of all the time. And so that's just my like addiction of choice. And so that's just what I'm doing all the time. So there's just so much stuff that I know that I'm writing that is never really for anything, or I have like, folders of documents where I'm like, I think eventually I want to write something about this. Here's some random stuff about it. It's totally unedited and totally not clear and like whatever, but I'll just leave it there and I'll come back to it later. Or maybe I will never will. I mean, like I feel like my laptop is just a graveyard of stuff that's like
Mm-hmm.
in various states of decay, And so I think it's rare that I finish something. I mean, even though like, I know I've written a lot and I like to do it because it's what I'm just doing all the time. But I don't really. Sometimes it's just a matter of like it just has to get finished, and I don't know like what's that line about. I really have never been able to like quite understand what does it mean for something to be finished or not.
Mm.
Some of it I rely on
I
other
think
people also to be like no or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. What
I
about you,
feel like
Melissa?
I feel like for me, there's a kind of spectrum, and like all the way at the sort of for me side of the spectrum are like my morning pages, right? Like my journaling that I do that I don't see as directly linked to my writing in any practical way. It's really like a mental health exercise, and there's like a little bit of like a spiritual exercise. It's like what I do to sort of, it's a hygiene, right? It's like a psychic
Hmm.
hygiene practice. And then in the middle are like my notebooks, right? Which is where I'm like writing down things throughout the day or ideas or thoughts, and it's fragmented and it's not meant for other eyes, but it might eventually become something that is. It's just like the sieve that is sort of like recording and processing and noting things I don't want to forget. Um, and then over here, there's like the stuff when I open up a Word document and I'm like, I'm going to write something about this. Even if it starts off as notes that look like the other two, I know that this is like, it's part of the art making, it's part of the creative process.
Yeah,
And
some
that,
of it just comes from that intentionality too, right?
yeah,
Like you open the document, like I'm actually ready to write this essay like today, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And sometimes that is the feeling. I think most of the time I'm in a state of like confusion and like it, you know, like those. I don't know. The image that just came to me was like, do you remember like in the '90s there would be that like a thing? I don't know where it happened on the television, I guess, where like a person was put inside of this box, this like glass box, and then money comes flying at them, and they have to catch the money. I feel like that's that's like my
Uh,
brain is trying to do that like most of the time, and then occasionally somebody just like gives you $20. You know, your brain is like, this is you can just take this.
Yeah.
You know.
It's true. I think I'm the same where it's like sometimes I talk to students or even other writers, but mostly students, and they're like, I don't know what to write about. And I'm like, I can't help you. I have the opposite problem. I've got
mhm.
like all the lists on my desktop, and my little stickies app is like
Yeah.
ideas and listed in notebooks. And it's like, what
But
is
I
the,
do remember that state of mind of like, I don't know what to write about yet, you know?
yeah.
But I mean, yeah, now I live with the opposite problem, but it's like, and I feel like the further you get from that state of like, do you remember that feeling like when you were a teenager and you wanted to write and you were just like, no, you were just,
I don't think I ever did.
I
I
think
mean, I
some of it is
definitely
just,
I had the question of like, is this good or like, would anyone else
yeah,
care about this? But I think I had like a kind of mania for like, just as you said, where like I am just a person who I was like a very secretive kid, very like sort of controlled and secretive kid, even. And so writing was like the only place for me to process a lot of what I was experiencing. And so I was just constantly doing it and also in love with reading from a really young age. And so it just felt like that's where I put almost everything. So it was like, what am I going to do with all this stuff and which ones are worth other people's eyes? Like maybe that was the question, you
but
know?
I think that it's also like, I feel like that's kind of what students are saying when they say they don't know
I
what to
guess
write
that's,
about. It's almost like that
yeah,
the problem is more, I don't know what I have permission to write about. I don't know what I'm allowed
right.
to write about. I don't know what I should be
Totally.
writing about. And that's like, that
Uh,
actually doesn't have anything to do with like having a subject or not. It's more like you
yeah.
have to relax, and that's a different process.
Yeah. And the lack of like trust that your own interest and curiosity and urgency will transfer to the person on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever broken one of your own rules in writing, either in this book or a previous book? And if so, what were they?
Do you have rules? I
I
mean,
I have a code of ethics, kind
Mm,
of. And I actually did break it a little bit in this book. Uh, and I didn't, like I've had so many experiences across these 5 books of writing about other people because it's impossible not to avoid. And I've crossed my own sort of threshold of ethical comfort in sort of writing about other people's experience to an
mhm,
extent that I didn't feel good about and that I decided I wouldn't do again. But one of the things that I've done in the past and decided I wouldn't do again is be cruel writing
mhm,
about other people, and to not use them as punchlines. And I will say there are a couple of moments in the dry season, and sometimes people just act in ways that are so ridiculous and funny that to recount them is to make a punchline of them.
mm,
And there are a couple
exactly.
of places where, and I will say, I actually love reading from these because it is so funny to me and the audience, it seems. Um, but I do have like a little, it chafes a little bit where I'm like, this is not generous, but it was funny enough that I was like, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. And I went to my wife a couple of weeks ago and I was like, I think I actually don't feel great about a couple of those lines about the last man that I ever had sex with. And she was like, you know what? It's done. She
It's too
was like,
funny.
there's no going back, baby.
It's simply too good. Oh, I don't know if I broke rules or I have. I mean, I'm sure I have because I think when you're younger, you kind of set certain hard lines and standards for yourself that later you realize are, more permeable and that like literature is more expansive and stranger than, your kind of like rigid maniacal art brain sometimes wants it to be. So I'm sure I have none really come to mind. I mean, I would say like I had become pretty committed to nonfiction and I really couldn't have imagined myself writing anything close to memoir. And so I think just the fact that like there is a chunk of memoir there is sort of like still feels kind of strange to me. I think, yeah,
Yeah.
um, that's
I think
really
it
the big
almost
one.
always feels, I don't know. I've met very few people who are like, I'm going to be a memoirist. Usually, I feel like the memoir subject hunts you down and drags you
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
desk and is like, sorry, babe, like you can't write that other thing until you deal with me.
I like this thing that you said though about like there's something you said in another interview and I'm not going to remember where you said it or whatever, but it was about like actually like that your impulse is not like that people think because you write so many memoirs that you're a very self-reflective person and you like processing your stuff and talking about it and going like you full steam ahead into your problems or whatever, but actually like the your work has sort of sprung up to create to like fill a gap that like you actually don't want to do that, and like I I feel that was sort of I felt like seen by that comment. I was sort of like, yeah, I feel like I was sort of forced to do some like accounting for a like long period of sort of like blindness and like self-betrayal that I had
Mhm.
gone through, and that's humiliating. And yet at the same time, I
Mm,
know it's like very ordinary, and like I feel like that's the one thing that kind of like kept me from going completely insane. I was like, I'm not writing about anything that no one hasn't also been through. There's
mhm,
just like there's really nothing that you can go through that like almost every single other person has also gone through
Yeah.
basically the same thing in one form or another.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it's so true. It's so, and just like, people are like, what inspires? Why this story? And I'm like, the animating question is almost always like, why did I do that? How did that happen? Like what? And memoir is itself like a kind of autopsy of experience, like filling in the gaps to make sense of what happened because it doesn't match up with the story that I tell myself about myself or the person that I believed I was.
I
mm.
liked so much, especially how in this one, I think more than any other one, and maybe it's just a matter of age and maturity and everything, but you do make fun of yourself so much. And there is a kind of like a different kind of critical distance that I could tell was just like, oh, this is just like a woman coming more into herself. And a writer that can kind of that's been here before,
Yeah.
and is like, I
Yeah.
loved it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Hey, Melissa, in reflecting on a year without sex, how did you balance that honesty with self-reflection and the crafting of it?
Hmm. How did I balance honesty and self-reflection with the crafting? Well, I think that those things are always inextricably related for me in
Hmm.
writing memoir. Because, as Catherine pointed out or paraphrased me, like I actually kind of want to run in the opposite direction of the answers to my own questions. Like it's
Hmm.
always there's this tension in me. I write memoirs about the things that I cannot face, right?
Mm, mm,
Because the aesthetic process of making art out of them makes it possible for me to face them because I find the puzzle of making art so compelling and so consuming and like I just forget that I'm afraid to write about the thing that I'm writing about because I am so interested in all of the decisions to be made and especially nonfiction aesthetically feels like a puzzle to me where it's like here's
sure.
what happened, here are your memories, here's the finite amount of research that maybe you've done or the people you've interviewed. Now like make it into something beautiful, like make it sing in the way that you do when you make a thing that you love, right? And so I get
Mm-hmm.
so occupied with that work, figuring out the structure, figuring out how to make it interesting because I want people, I read mysteries in my leisure time, and so no matter how much research or like reflection is in my books, I want them to be pleasurable. And so, especially with this book, it was like such an interior process. I was writing about, the scenes are like not super high stakes scenes from a great distance. And I had to figure out how to make propulsive what was largely an interior process. And that was a really fun puzzle to solve. And then there would be these moments where I was like, oh, fuck, where I suddenly reached the point of honesty and I realized I've been walking down that path the whole way. I just got distracted making it beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about you, Catherine? Like, because I know, like, this book also, I mean, it coexists with a novella. Has including that genre alongside the memoir, have you been able to access things that you think you wouldn't have been able to access if you had just written just straight memoir?
I mean, I'm sure there was definitely, there was definitely a kind of like register that I feel like I was able to like get into that I think I wouldn't have gone into if I hadn't spent basically a year sort of slowly writing that nonfiction and doing very little else. But I think it really also had a lot to do with just that year, you know.
Mm,
I mean, if Melissa, like, I was thinking about it because I was, read the dry season, and I was like, this is like, a year of like taking care of yourself by like going through a breakup and then taking care of yourself by not sleeping with anyone and just sort of going into a state of looking inward. But I feel like I don't really know. I don't really remember how much I like wrote about it, but I feel like my year was just the opposite. It was just like just a year like full of other people and relationships and romantic relationships kind of, but more like platonic relationships and just sex and whatever. And it was sort of interesting. I had been wanting to read the dry season, sort of knowing that, and I was like, it's really weird. They almost are kind of just like inverse, strange cousins of each other, but like or evil twins or something.
It's true.
Um,
I did one of the things I loved most about that half of your book, which I loved, is the presence of the friendships. And I feel like that is the thing that our books have in common, where like one
the
is
friends are there, right?
investment and one is about sort of like flinging oneself into the experience that is already ongoing. But there are these like this sort of chorus of friends that are present. And I find like that's something that I miss in a lot of contemporary writing where it doesn't really locate the narrator inside of their community, or you don't get to see them
Right.
interact in their friendships, which are often the places where we are most ourselves, right? We're not necessarily
Exactly.
writing a story about ourselves in friendship as we are in romantic relationships. And so I thought that was so beautifully rendered in this book.
I mean, the fiction, I think, I wrote all of everything that's in the memoir pretty much I wrote before I wrote the fiction. And so then the fiction was really it's just a conversation between these two women, sort of looking back at different moments in their like long friendship history. And
Mm.
I think that really was maybe more a reflection of just the fact that I had spent a solid year really like letting myself be totally in love with my friends, like and kind of realizing that like I actually don't need anything else. Like I have like I get a lot out of these relationships, and so I really wanted that like it was just felt natural. I'm not even sure if I really chose it. It just was like that was the mood.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
That when my wife read the close to final version of the dry season, she was like, "Oh, it's like a love story, but it's about your friends." It's like realizing that you can fall in love in a totally different, like often much safer way with your friends, and that intimacy
yeah.
is no less deep, and in fact, often much more deep and more sustaining and sustainable than the kind that you're creating with a lover.
Hmm.
And I asked you guys a silly question because Brooklyn Book
Jeez.
Festival, you know you were doing when you hired me. So you know I was going to ask something like this. Okay, so all of us here are memoirists and we're all young. We're all in our mid to late 20s. What have you ever had someone come up to you and be like, memoir, you're too young to have written a memoir? What is your response to that? What is it need to know your responses to that?
This has happened to me my whole adult life, basically my whole career. Because my first book was a memoir and I was still in my 20s when it came out.
Yeah.
And um, Yeah, I think I used to sort of launch into a really earnest like education for them of being like, well, listen, you must be thinking of autobiography and the difference between memoir and autobiography, da, 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 da. And
Yeah.
how often when people say that, I just say I'm much older than I look.
Has anyone asked you, Catherine, like, you put a memoir out, like,
I mean, I waited till I was 40. So I think they were like, okay, you've been divorced like one and a half times, like good enough, you know? Nobody, strangely, no one has come at me with that. But also, like, sometimes the book is just falls under novel anyway. Just depends on like who's
How is that
classifying
happening?
it.
Where are people? I have actually looked for it in bookstores and it's often like set out with the new releases. But have you been noticing that people are putting it in memoir or in fiction?
I've had conversations with booksellers as I've been like doing stuff, and some of them are like, we're putting it in fiction because that's where people go to look for your books. And some people are like, we're putting it in nonfiction because we've decided it's nonfiction. I mean, I've had some interesting conversations, and some people are like, we're just putting it in both places. I mean, it doesn't really qualify to be in either, so you can really just put it wherever. I don't think I particularly care about like where
Yeah.
it's placed.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so far nobody has accused me of being too young. Can you believe it? Of writing a memoir, you know?
it's coming, it's gonna happen. My dear friends, we are slowly approaching our time today, but I want to ask you one last question, which is, what is something unexpected writing these books have taught you about yourselves?
Mm.
Did I do a smart? Is that a good question?
No, it's a great
It's
question.
a great question. So I think that should be like a go-to question for like,
Yeah.
and I should have an answer to it, but I'm not sure if I do yet.
I
Yeah.
like, but the thing that fascinates you with memoir is like, I don't think we should go in knowing things. And I don't think we should leave. I think we should go in saying, I don't know, however, and what comes after the however is like what you do know. But then you still leave with some more questions as you evolve
Yeah.
and shed. But
Yeah,
so
Yeah.
I think saying, I don't know is,
Yeah.
I do have one, but do you have one?
You go.
Okay,
You go.
well, I have had weirdly the experience of after people had read the book, like what I had with uh, not well, I had this experience of talking to somebody in my family about like their problem with the way that something was portrayed, and I really was like kind of shocked by how I was like, no, that's how I remember it, and
Yeah.
like that's what's relevant, and like this detail that you're fixated on is not actually the important one. It's this other thing, and like that's just how it is. Like I was like I didn't do this thing where I was like, you know, apologize or like I should have done it this way or I'm sorry I didn't accommodate your vision of what blah blah. I was just like and that kind of surprised me. I didn't realize that I was like I think there was maybe something about the process of putting some things into words and sort of going over them a million times and showing them to other people and really being in a process with a story that made me just be like, I don't have to account for like what is verifiable fact that all 100% of the world would agree on. That's not the project of writing a book like this. But I can say like I'm not going to
Yeah.
accommodate your version of events, you know,
Yeah.
especially when
I
it's
love that.
something, yeah.
I'm so glad that that was your response. I did an events once with the Great Mary Carr, and someone asked us like, "What do you do when other people basically approach you like that and say, 'Oh, you got it wrong,' or 'I don't like how you portrayed me?'" And I gave a long, thoughtful blah 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 about my ethical compass or whatever. And Mary said, "I tell them write your own damn book." I was like,
icon.
she is truly an icon. She is. I mean, mine is, I think it seems pretty obvious, but it really wasn't to me. Like when it first occurred to me, or I first started realizing that I had a memoir to write about that experience, I was so afraid that the subject wasn't big enough. And it's like I recognized that itch, like the urgency in me was a book urgency. I know it. And I was like, I have,
Mhm.
300 pages to write about this, but I just don't know if the subject is worthy of a whole book. And then when I wrote it, I just didn't know that that year changed the entire course of the rest of my life. That I was like quite different as a person on the other side of it. And that's everything about the way my life is built right now, is owed to sort of the project that I undertook during that year. And I really didn't know it until I got like 2/3 of the way through.
You guys, I love you both so much. And unfortunately, we are at time for now. And I want to thank you for such a lively and insightful and heartfelt discussion.
Yeah.
And everyone who's watching, please remember that you can order books through the link in the chat. Please consider making a donation to the Brooklyn Book Festival, which is celebrating its 20th year this year and presenting free literary programming. Plus, today kicks off 9 days of Brooklyn Book Festival events, including citywide bookend events, the festival's in-person Children's Day and Festival Day that take place on September 20th and 21st in downtown Brooklyn, and is free to attend. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you. And thank you everyone for
Greg.
watching.
Thank
You're
you, Greg. Thanks so
perfect.
much.
Good to
Super
see you,
fun.
Catherine.
Yeah. Yeah, so good to see you too. Yeah.